Hi, everyone. I am starting the course right now, and we are going to have a first Zoom recorded lecture, and it's going to be on Lesson Plan 1. And I'm doing this to see if it can help you digest the material a little easier. So the first thing I want to do is share screen with you. And let me click on the share and pull up our lesson plan here. So this is Lesson Plan 1. It's an introduction to religious studies. And this is not a theology course. That is a very different course. This class is the academic study of religion, so we are taking a very objective, neutral position. And we're studying religion much like a historian or an anthropologist would study religion. We're not studying religion as a believer or a theological position. We're not claiming there is a God. We're not claiming there isn't a God. It's purely a neutral, objective academic study. So religious studies is a discipline that is offered at some of the major universities. I myself went to UC Santa Barbara and I have my PhD in religious studies, comparative world religions. You have some very good institutions with this program. UC Riverside has a religious studies program. I believe UCSD does. I heard they started one, but Santa Barbara definitely does. Harvard does. So some very well-known institutions have religious studies program. And other institutions also offer theological programs. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that that is approached from more of a believer's perspective, where this class is approached from a purely 100% academic neutral perspective. Okay, with that said, let me walk you through and show you what I have for this lesson plan. So these are the questions we're going to address in this lesson plan. What is religion? Why study it? What are its origins? What is the social function of religion? How to study religion? And what is the future of religion? All of these topics are addressed in your first reading, which is called How to Study the Sacred. And I have kind of highlights here in the notes of some of the key concepts, which I'll cover with you in a minute. I want to show you down at the bottom here. We have a mini lecture. So I had, prior to doing the Zoom lecture, I put up a YouTube film of about 4 to 5 minutes on this material. And so this kind of serves as a nice little summary of the material, especially right before you take your test. You may start the lesson plan off listening to it, so you know the direction of where the lesson plan is going. You can conclude the lesson plan listening to it, so you have an understanding of the key concepts right before you take the test. This is the required reading, and these are the films, and here's your post questions. So I think I already showed you this when I did my orientation with you, but I wanted to have you understand what the lesson plan entails. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is just start talking about what is religion. So the word religion is a Latin word, religio, which means to bind or to connect you or to yoke you with something. And what are you binding with? You're binding with something what is viewed as sacred. And so religion's experience of the sacred. It's binding you to something that you experience as sacred. It doesn't necessarily mean a God. Some of our religions we're going to study in this class are in fact atheistic religions. How in the world can a religion be atheistic? It indeed can be atheistic if it doesn't ascribe to a theistic Godhead. An example of atheistic religions in this semester, well, Buddhism is considered an atheistic religion. Jainism is considered an atheistic religion. And so are different branches within Hinduism, like the Advaita Vedanta school of thought. So yes, you can have a religion which is atheistic. Religion does not mean a belief in God. It means experiencing or connecting with something sacred. And so the different definitions that I offer you in the reading, one comes from Rudolf Otto, which is, his is very simple. His is that experience of something wholly other, wholly different than yourself, where you feel like something much greater than your own awareness. And so Rudolf Otto's definition, the experience of something wholly other, something numinous, some people describe it that way, it's an okay definition. The problem with some people have pointed out with it is that Otto is not considering that in some of the religions, there's not that other concept of something outside of yourself, but part and parcel of who you are. You know, you are part of that divine. So some people have critiqued it as being a little more Western based of a definition, because in the Eastern, you have more the divine within you concept. Another definition is Paul Tillich. And Paul Tillich's definition is the experience of, religion is one's ultimate concern. And one's ultimate concern is a good definition, oftentimes used in world religions books. But one potential problem with it is that it's a little too vague, because what is one's ultimate concern? Is your ultimate concern It's supposed to be, what he defined it as, something which transforms your life, which gives purpose and meaning and focus of your life. Oh, my phone just gave a little ringer. Just ignore that. So Paul Tillich's ultimate concern is, could it be my children? Could that be my religion? Could it be a sport I love? For instance, surfing, which I haven't surfed in a couple of months because of this whole coronavirus, and I'm going, that's not getting in the water. But that could be one's religion. But then you start putting everything into that definition, and it loses its credibility. So another definition is right here from Smith. And Smith defines religion as a cumulative tradition. And a cumulative tradition is a tradition that's always changing and evolving, and new concepts are developing within that religion. And so that's kind of a clever approach. He's really understanding that religion's not static, but it's always in a state of evolutionary change. The religion ideas you have now would be very different than the ones that were taught 100 years ago in that same religion. So religion's a cumulative tradition. He also says that religion is not an ism, and that's a very clever thing to say. When you're saying something's not an ism, what you're saying is religion is very complicated. It's very complex. It's not just one boxed set of beliefs, and all people in that religion believe in those exact same belief systems. That religion's much more complicated than that. For instance, when we talk about Hinduism, that's really a mistake to say there's an ism called Hinduism, because there's not one set of Hindu beliefs. There's so much variety and so many branches and so many nuances that constitutes Hinduism. So it's more correct to say the Hindu traditions. It's a little tough, though, in a world religions class to constantly say the Hindu traditions, the Buddhist traditions, the Jain traditions. It's so easy to say Jainism, Hinduism, but just know that it kind of misrepresents what we're talking about. Truly, religion's much more complicated than a little ism. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. And Ninian Smart. Now, Ninian Smart was my professor at UC Santa Barbara. He's passed away, but he was the head of the department. But he's got a very well-known, very popular definition. Some of you may say, well, you like his definition because he was your professor, so you have a little bias there. But truly, his is credited as a more modern day, very open explanation of religion, and a very well-accepted one. So if you open up world religions books, you will see very often, not always, but Ninian Smart's definition as the key definition. And so let me define it for you. Ninian Smart defines religion as a 7-dimensional organism. So there's 2 things we want to focus on. The concept of an organism means it's alive. Again, it's like that Smith idea that it's not static, it's not inactive, but it's dynamic and changing. Religions are always in the state of change that they adapt to their environment. If they don't adapt, sometimes they'll die out, because adapting is a good thing for religion. It makes sense, its ideas, in light of what's going on in the world today. And another thing he says is it's a 7 dimensions. So Ninian Smart's 7 dimensions, he's pointing out that all religions have these 7 aspects. All religions has some form of a ritual, and a ritual is an action that connects you with the sacred. All religions have some form of mythology or stories about the sacred. Myths don't mean fake stories or falsehoods. It just means stories about the sacred. And sometimes our myths have a little bit of history sprinkled in, and sometimes they have a lot of symbolism, and sometimes they're purely symbolic. So the religious stories are being told in religions. They may tell you a story about the Buddha. Well, historians think there really was a Buddha. So there's going to sprinkle in some history in there. And then you're going to have a story about the Buddha, when he was born. They talk, there's a sacred story about him being able to walk and talk right at birth. Okay, so now we're going to see that more symbolically and not as history, because we're going to see that those are embellishments to give the believer a sense of specialness about him. So mythology sometimes has history in it, the sacred stories, and sometimes they're filled with what we have in the reading. I'll mention the word hagiography. And hagiography is a fancy way to say embellishment. And embellishment is not necessarily the believer trying to dupe you into believing these stories. It's done out of usually sincerity and adoration for what the story is about. So these embellished accounts of hyperbole, so to speak. And then all religions have doctrines, and doctrines are the set of beliefs. They're not necessarily the book. I don't mean that. It means it could be oral, it could be written, it doesn't matter, but it's the belief system. And all religions have some form of belief system about the sacred. All religions have a social aspect. If it was just you having your own idiosyncratic ideas, it wouldn't necessarily be a religion. It has to have that social aspect where there's more than one. And that social aspect oftentimes gives people a sense of bonding, a sense of connection with their fellow religion followers and so forth. The experiential, all religions have this sense of experience, that they feel they experience the sacred somehow, usually through the ritual, through the stories, etc. So that experiential aspect. All religions have an ethical aspect, and I don't think the word's ironically, but interestingly, that's the word I wanted. Interestingly, most religions have very common ethical stances. Most religions say don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't lie. I mean, it's very common in the East and in the West, so it's not something just the Ten Commandments have. It's found in the Eastern religions as well. And one could give probably a very logical explanation, because humanity is much better off with those rules. So all cultures and all societies pretty much have them. And then all religions have a material aspect, and that's the material form. It represents the religion in material aspects. So for instance, it could be a book, it could be a religious location, it could be a religious statue, it could be a religious symbol. So there's some form of material. Now, if that material makes you connect with the divine to the level that you think the material is the divine. I mean, you're not just saying, oh, that's symbolizing the infinite to me, but that literally is the divine. This is a fancy word in the reading, and that's hagiography. I'm sorry, hierophany. I got my H's mixed up. Hierophany. A hierophany is a material form that you view as sacred itself in the material world. And so an example, I can connect one for you, would be for the Catholics. When they go to Mass and they go receive the Eucharist, they don't think they're taking a piece of bread in their mouth. They view it as literally, through what's called transubstantiation, literally a sacred object entering to their mouth, literally a divine object entering the mouth, literally the body of Jesus. So from the material perspective, if you view it not just a symbol of the sacred, but the sacred itself, then we call that a hierophany. Okay, so what is religion? We're going to work with all these definitions are good, but we're going to work with Indian Smarts, and we're going to use the 7 dimensions. When you do your project, you're going to be taking a religion that's very unfamiliar to you, not in your family, not in your umbrella religion, and applying these 7 dimensions to that religion and learning about the rituals and the myths and the doctrines and all of that, material forms, ethics of that religion. So start thinking about that. And Ninian Smart's definition is a really good one. It shows religion's alive and active, which touches into Smith's idea, and it shows that there's all these different parts to it. Now, I have here cult, sect, and established religion. So an established religion is a religion that's kind of gained credibility in mainstream society. A sect is a breakaway group from an established religion, and a cult simply means a new religion. All religions really start as a cult, either new or breakaway. And then in time, when they gain acceptance in society, they are viewed as established religions. And so an example would be, let me think of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's kind of fairly recent. So in the early stages, you would place it probably as a new religion here, but you wouldn't mean cult in a bad way. You wouldn't mean it as these brainwashing, virgin sacrificing group. You'd mean it as a new group. And in course of time, it's definitely become an established religion. I would never call it new from today's standards. It's definitely part of more mainstream. We even had Mitt Romney run for president. So it becomes much more a common accepted tradition and part of the established mainstream society. And now you use that title established. So religions can change the position from being a breakaway or bring a new religion to being an established religion in time. Okay, now why study religion? This is where, if you were in my class and we were at Mount SAC on campus, we'd have a big discussion about that. But just a very general idea is that I argue, and the reading has a small section on it, that we live in a pluralistic society, we live in a global village, whatever you want to call that, where it's a melting pot, and our neighbors are all different backgrounds, all different religious approaches to the world, and what a better world we'd live in if we all understood each other. That's the whole concept, to understand your next door neighbor. So when you see them, you don't see them as a foreigner, you don't see them as a threat, you don't see them as somebody who represents, something bad to you. You see them as somebody who has these 7 dimensions, okay? They have the same 7 dimensions you have, so you immediately see a common ground. You see them as somebody you could, they also have an experience of the sacred. So hopefully this class will build that sense of community, that sense of social connection with others that are what you usually thought is different than you. You see the commonality. And because we live in such an eclectic, pluralistic society, it's all the better that we understand each other. So that's that whole concept of pluralism. Education, I also argue, just to be an educated person, I mean, an educated person, part of your general education is to learn about the different traditions of the world and the different histories. I mean, this makes up, religion is the foundation of humanity all the way back. And so to really understand Indian society, you would have to understand Hinduism, or you to really understand Tibet, you'd have to understand Buddhism, or to really understand the Asian world, you know, you'd have to understand Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism for China. So it's part of the educational experience, it's part of understanding human history, and it's just shouldn't be just a GE, but really can contribute to your educated mind. That's kind of the gist of that. And then you may have your own fabulous reasons to take this class. Okay. So the origins of religion, we're going here. I'm trying to be very methodical. There's different theories of how religion started. Now, one very simple one, and I hear a lot of students say this in their posts because I asked you a question on this, is how did religion start? I ask you for one of your post possibilities is to explain the different theories of how religion may have started and which one makes the most sense to you. And when students say the theological, they're usually coming from a very religious position, and that's totally fine, and you could say that. But the theological argues that religion comes from usually their understanding of God or their understanding of the sacred. And if one does argue that, though, I always have this follow-up question just to think about, just to let it ruminate. If religion comes from, let's say, God, let's just use that word right now, do all religions come from God or just yours? And it's a little bit of a touchy subject because it brings into question that sense of fairness to the other religions. Is it just yours that has that special connection, or do they all? So if you do take that theological, just start thinking about philosophically what you're saying about all of that. The psychological, the sociological, anthropological, and biological, just a little bit about each. So the psychological, in the reading, it has a section on a little bit of Freud, kind of looking at our unconscious mind and our sexual impulses and all that, connecting to religion. He's got an interesting theory of Oedipus complex. And we also have Carl Jung, who's his student, who has the idea of the collective unconsciousness. And it's kind of really neat because he has this idea that we have this collective unconsciousness, and all these archetypal images, these universal symbols that are in this collective unconscious, they manifest in our dreams, and they also manifest in our religions. So it's almost like religions and dream world kind of connect in a way. It's fascinating. So the person that really took off with that understanding of Jungian analysis is Joseph Campbell, and he studied mythology and said the myths of the world, of these world religions, these stories are filled with these archetypes, and these same archetypes manifest in our dream world. Okay, cool stuff. Sociology of religion explains religion, its origins. It goes back to religion is a kind of a necessary ingredient for society. It's a functionalist approach. Religion is necessary for a properly functioning society, and it allows us to bond. It allows us to have order. It allows us to have structure. It allows us to fully function correctly. So they kind of use religion in a positive way, not arguing it's true or not true, just arguing sociologically what are its benefits. So sociology has that kind of interesting take on it. So moving to the next one, I'm just giving you a gist here. Anthropology or anthropological view. There's two in the reading that are discussed. One is Fraser, and one is Tyler. So Tyler's view is very simple. He says that early humans, anthropology is going to look at the early humans perspective, and early humans would have dreams, and in the dreams, they may have dreams of their dead ancestors, but they knew their dead ancestors were dead, so they thought, oh, they must be a separate world. There must be a spirit world. And so from the misunderstanding of what a dream was came that concept of this world versus that world, or the spirit world. And he then argued that early humans had animism, where now that we have the concept of a spirit world, we see spirit forms in the natural world, and that's animism. Like if you see the tree as being a divine energy within the tree, or divine sacredness within the tree, and it's the divine itself, that is a case of animism. So early humans first came from the dream world, had the concept of the spirit world, and then applied it to the natural world. And then another anthropologist that we want to talk about is Fraser, and he had some interesting ideas. He said that religion starts off no, sorry, humans start off trying to control nature by magic. And it didn't work. So when we deified those forces of nature and gave names to them and personalities to them, and we tried to control it through religious rituals to control nature. And he's arguing that's not really working that well either. So science comes along, and science is trying to control nature. And he thinks there's like stages in human history, and now we're in that science stage. So it's just an interesting take on it. Biology, little story here is that I think I start the reading off talking about Francis Crick. And so Francis Crick is the classic example of a well-known biologist. He won the Nobel Prize in biochemistry for discovering the structure of the DNA molecule. And my story is that I told in the reading is I met him at UC San Diego when I was undergraduate there, and I didn't know it was Francis Crick. I was only introduced to him as Francis, and I have a biology minor. So I knew the name Francis Crick, but was never said, hey, this is Francis Crick. I said, this is Francis. So at this event I was at actually my professor's was having an evening party there for graduate students and research assistants I was helping. And Francis Crick was the main star there. I sat down with him and spoke 2 hours, not knowing it was Francis Crick, saying very embarrassing things like, what do you do for a living, Francis? And do you ever want to come out and help me in the lab sometime? Thinking, you know, he'd be so honored to view me doing my science. But it ended up to be a very interesting conversation because I felt very comfortable talking to him, not knowing he was a superstar. And I ended up getting in a debate with him, and he was saying, what am I going to study? And I said, I'm going to go study comparative world religions in Santa Barbara eventually. And he was saying, don't waste your time, just study the brain, study neurology. And I appreciate his argument, but it was very much arguing kind of the biological take on things. So everything could be explained by biology, neurology, and how you'd apply it to religion is you'd say, somebody like Francis Crick would say, how do you explain the origins of religion? It goes back to kind of an evolutionary biological explanation, and early human beings, it kind of fits with sociology here, early human beings that had that religious approach to the world, maybe had a more meaning system, and had a better chance of survival because of that. And they ended up passing that approach to the world to the next generation. Genetically, somehow it got hardwired in there. About 30,000 years ago, they say that human beings developed what are called spirit genes, which is a fascinating topic. And these spirit genes that are part of early humans' thinking is that there is that sense of that sacred. And early human beings that had those spirit genes had a better kind of chance of survival in a way, because you could argue that it's something to look forward to. You can argue it helped them bond and develop social rules and structure. There's a lot you can argue there, but kind of more grounded in a biological evolution explanation. And the reading talks about it much better than I just did. Okay, so this here is a chapter I used to assign, and it's, I think, chapter 5 in the reading. I'm not sure, 5 or 6, but it is the social function of religion, and I go into depth on these 4 sociologists. And I am just saying it's optional. You can skip it if you want. I'm trying to lessen your workload on that. Okay, how to study religion. This is important. Let me look at my clock. Okay, I've been talking for 20 minutes. I'm going to continue for 10 more. So the study of religion is, again, I mentioned this is not a theology class. It is instead an academic one. And I'll just get to the gist here. The main approach we're going to take is the approach of phenomenology. That's our methodology. It's our main methodology. And phenomenology is trying to step into the shoes of the believer to see how they view the world. So to understand Hinduism, I'd really have to step into the shoes of the Hindu, not perfectly, because I wouldn't necessarily be if I was able to perfectly do it, I would be a Hindu, but really try to see the worldview from the Hindu's perspective and understanding Hinduism. But not just do phenomenology, the study of religious phenomena from the believer's perspective, also engage, and I put "and" here, social and historical analysis. So step 1, empathy, step into the shoes of the believer, understanding their worldview, that's phenomenology. Step 2, then step out of the believer's shoes and now understand how these beliefs develop in a social historical context. What led to these beliefs? What societal events, what historical events led to those beliefs? So it's a combination of understanding the believer and then placing it in history. This second section of social historical analysis can be a sensitive approach. Some people, when you're studying one's own religion through the social historical analysis, sometimes that's challenging because people aren't used to that. They're just used to the beliefs, but they're not used to somebody stepping back and saying, well, these beliefs developed because this happened and that happened, and they voted on this and they decided that, and this battle happened, and this group won and that group didn't. So when you do the social historical analysis, and you are a believer and you're not used to that, that's when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not comfortable with this analysis. So I have to be very sensitive as a world religion teacher. I'm aware of that. It's a tough subject for people sometimes to teach because some people feel threatened enough to where, not me personally, but some religious scholars of the world have received threats because, or have had to have bodyguards, because when they have their name well known and they're a famous, well-known historian of religion, some of their work is not well received by certain groups. So just to let you know, that's a tough part of my job. It's not an easy part of my job, but hopefully through the whole semester you realize we're doing it to not just one religion, we do it to all the religions. Okay, so placing it in historical context. The future of religion. What else did I want to say? Oh, I know I want to say about the study of religion real quick. In the reading, it talks about there's three main approaches to studying religion. You can approach it from empathy, sympathy, and antipathy. And then we are going to take the empathy. So we're not going to approach it from all three ways. Antipathy is a more negative view, and it's more of a Marxian, Freudian, Nietzschean analysis of religion. Nothing wrong with that. I'm a philosopher. I love that stuff, but I'm not taking that approach in this class. The second approach would be, and if you wanted to write a post on that, that's fine. That would kind of from an antipathetic Nietzschean view or something would be kind of fun to read. It's just that's not our method in the class. I'm sorry, the other approach was the sympathetic approach, and that's more of a theological approach where you're sympathizing with one religion and looking at the others according to that, and we're not taking that approach. So we are taking the empathy approach mixed in with the social historical analysis. Okay, done with that. Future of religion. I think this chapter, I think I also said you didn't have to read. So I did eliminate this one too. The reason why is, well, it talks a lot about the baby boomers. And the baby boomers, I wrote this book a few years ago, and the baby boomers are getting kind of outdated, and meaning that, I'm sorry to say, I'm not a baby boomer, but my brothers and sisters are, my husband's a baby boomer. So the baby boomers are a generation that transformed America because they made up 1/3 of America, and their whole religious attitude changed from the generation prior to them. So they're very significant. But now they're getting so much kind of in their old age that I don't think that they're the relevant players now, and they're changing a religious American scene right now. It's the younger group. So I just felt like that research was really cool 10, 15 years ago, super cool, but now it's kind of a little passé, a little bit. But I think I asked you one question on it, and I'm using this right here. So the baby boomers are born between 1946 and 1964. They have a very tolerant view of religion, very different than their predecessors. And America is made up, they're still made up of a big chunk of baby boomers, but their whole approach has transformed the American religious landscape. Okay, so that's my statement there. And the Pew Research is showing you kind of where the religious trends are going. So a big religious trend, which might surprise you, is the non-religious are just growing, and it's growing. It used to be 10% to 20%. Now it's up to 30%. They're called the nuns, N-O-N-E. There's the non-religious approach. Big, huge movement there. Many in this class might be part of that nun movement. And then another trend we see is Christianity. It's still growing, but it's being surpassed by Islam. And so by 2050, they argue that they're going to be equal, and that by 2070, Islam will be higher than or larger in number. In terms of the religious numbers I have in the reading in chapter 1, those numbers are outdated. So I just want to clarify that. Maybe I should give you the numbers real quick, just for your own insight here. So for Christianity, it's like 2.2 some billion, and Islam is 1.6 billion. And again, give or take a little bit. And then Hinduism is 1 billion, I'm doing roundabout. Buddhism is about 500 million. So in the reading, I think I might have said 400,000. So it's now larger than that. Sikhism is about 25 million. And Jainism is about 5 to 7 million. And so I'm just trying to give you the numbers, and the numbers are different than the reading portrayed. Okay. I guess I'm finished with all of that. The mini lecture kind of walks you through this. The required reading is available to you. Here it is. There's 3 ways for you to read that. The chapters is actually it's chapters 1 through 5. The introduction's really short. It's just like a page or two explaining. I think I start off the story with the elephant and the blind man. So that was a really relevant story. So understand that story. And I walked you through here. And then how to read this book. So the PDF's here, hard copy. If you want to order Amazon's great, but here is the way to listen to it. And the reader on that one is a good reader. And it's not me, it's somebody else. Okay, where am I going? I'm going back here. And then the films here, I have 2 films for you. One is Baraka. Baraka is just a very beautiful, no narration film. It's pure cinematography, and it takes you around the world and shows you the different religious rituals. And it's cool to watch, and it's very meditative, relaxing, no note taking, just enjoy it. It's 2 hours long, I believe. Closer, maybe, no, I'm sorry, it's an hour and a half, and I'm asking you to watch the first 15 minutes. There's a lot of good religious scenes in the last 15, so you get to choose. And the word baraka is an Islamic word, which means blessing. And then I have this TED Ed lecture, and it really walks you through 5 of the major world religions, not all of them. I think the one, I don't think it has anything on Sikhism. It doesn't have anything on Jainism, but it walks you through, and it gives you kind of the gist of the world religions. So we're starting off this class, I thought, for 11 minutes. You learn a lot in that. Okay, your post question here. I have 2 options for you. What is religion and why study it, and how religions may have started, and what's your idea, what makes sense to you. So I have bullet 1 and bullet 2, bullet 1 and bullet 2. So you answer both bullets, but you don't have to answer both posts. And I say or, and then if you ever have an option like to do this post or that post, if you wanted to do both, you do not have to, but that becomes extra credit. And then I have down here some hints on posts. I don't even know what I have there. Oh, examples of strong ones and weak ones. So hopefully, and again, I just did it within 30 minutes, yay. Hopefully this has helped you understand the religious studies in our introduction and lesson plan 1. And so make sure the reading is a 2-hour reading, the film watching, gosh, the film watching is 25 minutes, really easy one. And then clicking through the notes, understanding everything I kind of talked about, and start working on your post. Your post is not due until this weekend, but you're welcome to start at any time. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Bye everybody. Good night, or good night for me. I'm experiencing evening here. You're probably watching this in the morning. Okay, bye-bye. Stop share, end meeting. Bye-bye.